Welcome to the Lords and Heroes section of my Vampire Coast guide. In this video we'll cover the Lords and Heroes of the Vampire Coast factions, including campaign and battle, as well as abilities and unique effects. Disclaimer: this guide is based on my personal experience and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Now that's out of the way, let's get into the video. At the time of writing, the Vampire Coast have access to 4 legendary lords across 4 factions. Which lord you pick can have some minor and major effects on how they play in campaign as well as battle. For the most part, I'd say the Vampire Coast lords and heroes are pretty good. They have a decent selection of some powerful laws of magic, as well as some pretty good fighters for battle in general. The Gunnery Wights are a particularly nice addition with their abilities that can buff your entire ranged roster if you use them correctly. The fleet captains, however, left some to be desired. Their ability to be spellcasters in battle as well as Pirate Cove builders in campaign made them quite high in demand whilst being quite short in supply. This isn't really a fault of the unit, more that it's an issue with the recruitment system for them. Hero capacity is something that the faction tends to struggle with altogether, seeing as every army wants a Gunnery Wight and the buildings needed to increase their capacity are quite high in the tree and expensive, meaning it's only possible once you get to the very end game. Something that is amazing with the faction is the mounts, in particular the mounts for the legendary lords. They're some of the best options in the game, with the crown jewel obviously being Noctilus on his Necrofex, which turns him into one of the biggest terrors on any battlefield. The generic lord options are okay for variety, with 2 combat options and 3 lords of magic, but aside from the spellcasting, they aren't really the best in combat and are more there to support rather than directly contribute to the fighting. The lords you unlock via research are in a halfway point between standard and legendary, since they spawn with unique effects for their armies and the faction as a whole, while also being immortal right out the gate. They're also the only other lords that have access to shipbuilding and will never become disloyal, so should really be picked up as soon as you can. One final thing to note is that even though they have access to 3 laws of magic, the 2 that aren't the law of the vampires end up falling to the wayside, seeing as the ability to heal your troops and the beauty that is Wind of Death is pretty hard to turn down. Now with all that being said, let's get into the lords. Kicking us off, we have Luthor Hakan, who's in control of the Awakening.
Power shall heal my mind.
Choosing him will grant the faction minus 60 relations with lizards and plus 8 leadership when fighting them, as well as plus 6 melee defense for all lords and heroes. Luthor's personal army gains 25% magic resist and causes plus 3 vampiric corruption locally. Luthor himself also has a fractured mind, meaning occasionally he will jump between personalities until you complete the quest to heal him. These personalities can grant him different buffs and debuffs in campaign and battle, as well as certain spells. His starting army gets a bloated corpse, deck droppers, and Mournguls. In battle, he's a melee expert and a duelist with the ability to attack from range whilst on the move. As with all Vampire Coast units, he's also aquatic, but I don't really need to explain what that does every time. He's best used to target enemy lords or heroes, first from range and then in melee once they close in on him. Depending on the personality, he can use spells, but his completed form has access to none. He has the Death Shriek Terrorgeist as a mount, and the abilities The Hunger, Magical Void, Power Siphon, and Hornswoggle. When leveling him, you want to follow the usual Root Marcher and Red Tree, making sure to focus on ranged and artillery units since they're the heart of your army. The Hunger is never a bad option for vampires, and the Fractured Mind line has some great options. Forager, Smuggler, Poacher and Arsonist are all good, and his mount is actually great in contrast to the base unit. He has access to one mission, the quest for Slang Gold. It starts off with a pretty easy initial fight versus a tiny lizard army. Once they're taken care of, there is another much larger army coming from behind you, but they're pretty far off, so you have lots of time to form up. The ranged focus of the faction allows you to take the approaching army to pieces before long, so it's not that hard to take them out with even a mid-game army with plenty of ranged. The item gained gives Luthor some bonuses for battle and campaign, as well as a Hex ability. Next up we have Count Noctilus, who's in control of the Dread Fleet.
Tides of death.
Choosing him will grant the faction unique war declaration missions, plus 2 to crew recruitment capacity, and minus 1 to Necrofex recruitment time. His personal army gets minus 20% upkeep for Necrofex, and plus 15% weapon strength for all large units. His starting army gets Depth Guard, a Gunnery Mob, and a Necrofex. In battle, he's armoured and deals massive amounts of armour-piercing damage in melee. He's amazing at both frontline support and dueling other lords, and is honestly up there as one of the strongest lords in the game if you ask me. He has access to a mix of spells with Drown Dead, Invocation of Nehek, and Wind of Death coming from the Vampire Coast version of the Lore of the Vampires, and Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma, the Withering, and Pit of Shades coming from the Lore of Shadows. He only has access to the Necrofex mount and has the abilities Curse of Undeath, Smoke and Mirrors, the Hunger, Arcane Conduit, and Wraithstorm. When levelling him, we of course follow the same Root Marcher and ranged focus red tree as usual. The Master of the Dreadfleet line is all amazing, and his spells are pretty great as long as you focus on Invocation and Wind of Death spells. Of course his mount is the best, so get it as soon as you can. The Yellow Tree is a good option for if you want to one-man army with him, but personally, it's only used once everything is leveled how I want it. He also has access to just one mission. Captain Roth's Moondial pits you against a reasonably strong Empire army with a variety of units. There is a main force directly ahead of you, as well as a smaller force protecting some artillery on the hill to the left. It might be worth bringing something to take out this artillery, but it's very possible to win without doing so. I'd say a balanced mid-game army would be enough to beat this, and the item gain gives you some pretty great campaign buffs, as well as a summon ability in battle.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You there, are you a part of the 11%? 11% of what? The 11% of people subscribed, of course. You're not? Or what are you waiting for? The button's right there. Subscribing will ensure you never miss a video, and has been proven to increase your epic gamer skill by at least 1%. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you could also like the video to be in with a chance of winning eternal happiness. So go ahead and subscribe, and join the 11% today. We now return you to your regular scheduled programming.
Next we have Aranessa Saltspite, who is in control of the Pirates of Sartosa.
Blood, salt, and plunder!
Choosing her will grant the faction minus 100 relations with Norska, plus 25% chance of finding treasure maps, plus 50% income from raiding, and plus 20% income from sacking. Her personal army gets plus 20% weapon strength and melee attack for all Sartosan units, as well as plus 12 to her leadership aura effect. Her starting army gets deck gunners, rotting Prometheans, and Sartosa Free Company. In battle she deals armor-piercing anti-large damage and is melee expert. You'd think this would make her great in combat, but unfortunately she suffers from god-awful armor, so is best used to take on key targets rather than leading the charge all the time. She has no spells, but does have the Rotting Promethean mount, which makes her slightly less killable. She has access to the abilities Manan's Luck, All Hands Hoay, and Spearfish's Net. When levelling her, we're of course going to follow the standard Root Marcher and ranged red tree. The Mutant line has some great options, and all of the Forager options are great too. The mount is good for giving her some more survivability, and Lucky Charm and Tenacity are always good additions. She also has access to one mission, Kraken's Bane. It pits you against two sets of reasonably strong Norscan forces, and you're for some reason backed up by the Empire a little into the battle. Fortunately, you start on a hill, so can shoot down at the approaching enemies pretty easily and soften up the forces substantially before they get to you. The item gained is a pretty nice weapon that makes her much stronger in battle, as well as gaining an augment and further increasing raiding income. Our final legendary lord is Cylostra Direfin, and she's in control of the Drowned.
The final act!
Choosing her will grant the faction plus 2 loyalty for new recruits, minus 20% upkeep and recruit cost for Cyrene and Mourngul units. Her personal army is granted plus 5% physical resist and magical attacks for all units. Her starting army gets Mourngul's, Cyrenes, and a Carronade. In battle, she's an ethereal spellcaster who causes terror, and she's best used for spell support with the occasional bit of combat. Her ethereal nature causes her to be pretty hard to kill, but it's still not the best idea to let her get surrounded, as she will quickly break and die if left alone. She has access to Lore of the Deeps, and can use the Rotting Leviathan mount. Her abilities are Kiss of the Deep, Arcane Conduit, Song of Enthrallment, and Ghost of the Past. Leveling her will of course follow the usual Root Marcher and Red Tree to start off with, then we'll go for the Ghost of the Past to get our hands on her unique summon. From the Depths has some interesting options, and her mount is also pretty top tier. Finally, her spells can be picked up, but I'd focus on the summons and the Vargeist Revenge if I were you. She technically has access to 2 missions, but they're essentially the same, and which one you get depends on the campaign you're playing. Either way, it's called Cylostria's Bordello Flabellum, and in Mortal Empires, it puts you against a pretty large and varied Bretonnian force that gets reinforced once you take out the majority. It's a pretty tough battle, and I'd say you need a mid to late game army if you want to get through it easily. The item gained has some great campaign bonuses, as well as a passive ability. Our first non-legendary lord is the Vampire Fleet Admirals, and while they do come in 2 varieties of weapon and 3 varieties of magic, I'll go over them as one and point out the differences when I come to them. The pistol variety fire armor-piercing missiles and can fire on the move, as well as casting spells. While they can also be used for some light melee combat, it's not really their best use. To get the most out of them, I keep them on my backline so that they can provide fire support and cast spells where needed, whilst being close enough to your units that they're encouraged. Pole arms are a little different, since they lose the range damage in favour of armor-piercing anti-large damage. This makes them into much more effective frontline fighters, as well as being good at keeping on the back lines to fight off any flanks whilst providing spell support. All varieties have access to the Rotting Promethean mount, and have the abilities The Hunger and All Hands Hoay. Both pistols and polearms also have access to 3 Laws of Magic with their own respective ability to go with it. The Law of the Vampires comes with Curse of the Undeath, the Law of Death comes with Life Leeching, and the Law of the Deeps comes with Kiss of the Deep. They also all level pretty much the same, starting off as usual with Root Marcher and Red Tree. Non-legendaries can only choose one of the Forager line, and it really depends on what that specific lord is doing, so choose at your own discretion. The mount is always a good idea for some more defense and damage, and the spells are always a good thing to have around. Finally, Immortality is always brilliant, and Loyal to the End ensures that they won't go running off no matter what. There are also 4 lords you can unlock via research that are basically the same as these guys, but with some minor differences. All of them come with Immortality and Loyal to the End being unlocked, and they can also use shipbuilding, so are the perfect choice for leading as many of your armies as you can. The Disreputable Admiral has a plus 20% chance of stealing a magic item post-battle, minus 15% recruit cost for their own army, and plus 100% leadership aura size when defending. The Infamous Admiral gets plus 15 armor and plus 10 leadership when laying siege for the whole army, and plus 15% ambush defense chance. The Notorious Admiral gets plus 10% physical resist and plus 15% weapon damage for the army, as well as plus 20 growth locally. Finally, the Dread Admiral gets plus 10 bonus versus large, and plus 10% to range and charge bonus. Now we come to the heroes, starting with the one legendary, Robert Barthelemy. He's like a paladin from Bretonia, so on the campaign map he can assault garrisons, assassinate characters, and assault armies. He spreads public order in the local province, and when embedded in an army, he increases replenishment. In battle, he's ethereal and shielded, and deals anti-large damage. He's near impossible to kill if the enemy has no magical damage, and he's a great option for dueling, but as usual, it's important not to let him get swamped, as he will still die eventually if left without backup. He has no spells, but does have the Barded Warhorse mount, and the abilities Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught. When leveling him, you can go for either the Assassin or the Battle Guy. For the Assassin build, you want to go Blue Tree, and that's about it since he comes with Immortality by default. For battle, you want to go more into the Yellow Tree and Cold Blade line to ensure you're getting the absolute most out of him. Lady's Mantle is always good, and a little replenishment never hurt anybody. Gunnery Wights are up next. On the campaign map, they can steal tech, wound heroes, and block armies. They boost the income of the local province, and when embedded in an army, they provide training. In battle, they fire armor-piercing missiles, whilst buffing all nearby missile units, so are amazing of having on your backlines to drastically increase the damage output of your army. I personally keep them near my artillery, particularly Queen Bess, and I have him restock ammo until there's nothing left to shoot at. They have no spells, but do have access to the Rotting Promethean mount, as well as the abilities Dead Eyes, Bomb Throw, Enchanted Ballistics, Cackle Fruit, and Extra Powder. When leveling him, I go for purely battle use, so I focus on training in the Cackle Fruit line to unlock his abilities to buff the army. The Always Ready line increases his own missile prowess, and the mount is always good for survivability and manoeuvrability. Finally, we of course want to pick up Immortality. Next up we have the Mourngul Haunter. On the campaign map, they can damage buildings, assassinate, and hinder replenishment. They spread corruption in the local province, and when embedded in an army, they increase post-battle loot. In battle, they deal armor-piercing anti-infantry damage and can stalk and use terror. They work best as sneaky flankers to either focus down footlords or some clumps of infantry, but they do need to be careful not to get surrounded, as their large size and tendency to be out of position can cause them to get swarmed and focused down quickly. They have no spells or mounts, but do have the abilities Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught. When leveling them, you can go one of 2 routes. For campaign use, you're going to focus solely on the Blue Tree, prioritising based on what they're doing most, and of course picking up Immortality as soon as possible. For battle, you want to grab Scavenge and the Monkey Jacket line to get various improvements to their battle prowess. Killing Cold line also has a variety of skills that can further improve them in a variety of ways. Haunter of the Dark and Tenacity are other good options, and finally, Immortality is as essential as always. Finally, we come to the Vampire Fleet Captains, and they come in 3 varieties, but the only difference is the spells and an ability, so I'll cover them as one for now. In campaign, they can establish pirate coves, wound, and assault units. They spread public order locally, and when embedded in an army, they increase replenishment. In battle, they're primarily spellcasters, but are also decent melee combatants if it comes down to that. I think it's best to keep them on the backlines to support with spells, and only send them into melee when it's absolutely safe or necessary. They have access to the Rotting Promethean mount, and the abilities The Hunger and Taunt. The Vampire Captain has access to the Law of Vampires and Curse of Undeath. The Death Captain has access to Law of Death and Life Leeching. And finally, the Deeps Captain has access to Law of the Deeps and Kiss of the Deep. When building them, you can either go for campaign or battle. For campaign, you basically want to get Specialist and Pirate Cove cost reduction, as well as Immortality, and that's it. For battle, you want to get the Replenishment, as well as the Monkey Jacket line. Spells always come in useful, and Deception or Kidnapping both offer great options. Demount is great for increased survivability, and Lucky Charm and Tenacity are always welcome. Finally, Immortality is a must as usual. Thanks for watching this section of my Vampire Coast guide. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the card and in the description for a playlist to the series. Don't forget to vote in the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video at any point, please consider leaving a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button to stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.